The Brotherhood of the Silent Blade. Chapter 7, Echoes of Betrayal. The forest seemed darker tonight, the usual symphony of rustling leaves and distant wildlife replaced by an eerie quiet. Even the wind felt muted, as though it too feared what was to come. The Brotherhood's camp was alive with hushed murmurs, the men moving like shadows, tension threading through them like an unspoken curse. The recent battle had taken its toll, and the royal documents Aldric had recovered painted a grim picture of their future. Sir Aldric Lorne stood at the edge of the camp, his tarnished armor catching faint glimmers of firelight. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, an unconscious gesture of readiness. The forest beyond was a wall of shadows, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the crumpled documents now tucked in his satchel and the ominous weight of their implications. Pondering the meaning of life again, knight? Thane's voice broke the silence, light-hearted but edged with curiosity. He leaned against a tree, his ever-present smirk softened by exhaustion. Yet there was something watchful in his eyes tonight, a subtle shift Aldric couldn't quite place. Something like that, Aldric replied, his gaze still fixed on the tree-lean. The king's plans are ambitious. Thane raised an eyebrow. Ambitious enough to worry you? Ambitious enough to wipe us out, Aldric said plainly. He knows we're more than a thorn in his side now. He'll send everything he has to crush us. Thane let out a low whistle, crossing his arms. And you think Malrik's ready for that? Aldric's silence was answer enough. As the camp settled into its nightly routine, Aldric sought Bryn. He found her sitting by the main fire, her bow resting across her lap as she methodically checked her arrows. The flames cast warm light across her face, highlighting her sharp features and the quiet intensity in her eyes. "Bryn," he said, stepping closer. She glanced up, her expression neutral but attentive. "Sir Aldric," she replied, setting aside an arrow. "What can I do for you?" He sat across from her, the weight of his thoughts evident in his posture. "You've been with the Brotherhood long enough to see its strengths and weaknesses. What's your take on our chances against the king's forces?" Bryn leaned back slightly, studying him. "If we keep doing what we've been doing, our chances are slim. Malrik's tactics work for now, but they rely on the king underestimating us. That won't last." Aldric nodded, unsurprised by her assessment. "And if we change our approach?" "Depends on the change," Bryn said. Her gaze shifted to the fire, her tone thoughtful. "We need to fight smarter, not harder. Use the terrain, the people's discontent with the crown, anything that gives us an edge." "You sound like you've been through this before," Aldric observed. Bryn's lips twitched in a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I've seen what happens to groups like ours when they refuse to adapt. They don't last." Her words lingered between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Aldric didn't press her further, sensing that her past, like his, carried wounds not easily shared. The night deepened, and the campfire's glow was replaced by the dim light of a crescent moon. Aldric stood near the command tent, reviewing the stolen documents once more. The patterns of troop movements and supply routes told a story of calculated pressure, a tightening noose around the Brotherhood's territory. Malrik's voice broke the silence. "I see you've made yourself comfortable with those." Aldric turned to see Malrik's silhouette, his dark armor blending with the shadows. His tone was sharp, carrying the weight of both authority and suspicion. "These aren't just plans, Malrik," Aldric said, holding up one of the documents. "They're a declaration of war. The king's coming for us, and if we don't adapt, he'll win." Malrik stepped closer, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Aldric's. "And what would you suggest, knight? Diplomacy? Mercy? You've seen the men we fight. They won't hesitate to gut us the moment we falter." "I'm not suggesting mercy," Aldric said evenly. "I'm suggesting strategy. Precision. We don't need to fight every battle to win the war." Malrik scoffed, his expression darkening. And who's to say your strategy won't cost us lives? Aldric's jaw tightened. It's not about avoiding losses. It's about making them count. The two men stared at each other, the air between them charged with tension. Malrik's smirk returned, colder than before. Careful, Aldric. Ambition has a way of turning allies into enemies. Maybe that's something you should remember, Aldric said quietly. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Malrik's face, but before he could respond, a sharp whistle cut through the air. The camp snapped to attention as a scout burst into the clearing, his face pale and breathless. Riders, the scout gasped. At least a dozen, heading this way. Could be more. Malrik's smirk vanished, replaced by the cold efficiency of a seasoned leader. Get the men ready. No fires, no noise. We'll meet them in the dark. Aldric's hand instinctively moved to his sword as the camp came alive with muted urgency. He followed Malrik to the edge of the clearing, where the first faint sounds of hoofbeats echoed through the trees. They're coming fast, Malrik muttered, his eyes scanning the darkness. Aldric nodded, his grip tightening on his blade. This won't be a simple skirmish. Nothing ever is, Malrik replied, his tone grim. He glanced at Aldric, his expression unreadable. Let's see if your honor holds up when the blood starts flowing. The Brotherhood melted into the shadows, each man and woman taking their positions with practiced silence. Aldric crouched behind a fallen log, his eyes fixed on the approaching figures. The riders emerged from the gloom, their armor glinting faintly in the moonlight. They were well armed, their formation disciplined, a far cry from the raiders the Brotherhood usually faced. Bryn knelt nearby, her bow drawn and ready. Break their formation, she whispered to Aldric, her voice low but urgent. Take the flank when the time comes. He nodded, trusting her instincts. The lead rider raised a hand, signaling a halt. The forest fell eerily silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Then, with a shout, the riders charged. The clearing erupted into chaos. Arrows flew, blades clashed, and the air filled with the sounds of battle. Aldric moved with precision, his sword finding its mark again and again. He fought not with fury but with purpose, each strike a reminder of the discipline Saren had taught him. Nearby, Bryn's arrows found their targets with deadly accuracy, while Malrik carved through the enemy with ruthless efficiency. The Brotherhood held their ground, their unity forged in the heat of combat. When the last rider fell, the clearing was a battlefield of broken bodies and blood-soaked earth. As Aldric regrouped with Bryn, he noticed Thane watching from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Malrik approached Aldric, his sword still dripping with blood. Not bad, knight. But don't get comfortable. This was just the beginning. Aldric sheathed his blade, his gaze sweeping over the carnage. Neither am I. In the distance, the moon slipped behind a cloud, plunging the forest into darkness once more.